Obviously delivered in the main event, capped off with a war. Just give us your thoughts on Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett delivering a 5-round battle.
Yeah, I mean, what a couple. So Paddy Pimblett at the weigh-ins yesterday says, I'm going to knock this motherfucker out tomorrow. And I was like, that's interesting. And he never abandoned that game plan. Even when, he got dropped a couple times, I kept waiting for him. I'm like, he's eventually going to have to shoot and try to submit him.
When Joe Rogan just dropped the most controversial statement of his entire UFC career, and the entire MMA world is absolutely losing its mind right now, what he said about the Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett fight has fighters, fans, and even UFC executives scrambling to respond. And when you hear his exact words, you're going to understand why this has become the biggest talking point in combat sports right now. Before we get into Rogan's explosive reaction, we need to talk about these two fighters and why this matchup had everyone talking from the moment it was announced. Justin Gaethje is, without question, one of the most violent and dangerous strikers the lightweight division has ever seen. This man has built his entire career on walking through fire to deliver absolute carnage to anyone standing across from him in that octagon. Gaethje's fighting style is basically controlled chaos mixed with technical precision and brutal power. Every single one of his fights looks like a scene from a movie where two warriors are trying to end each other. His leg kicks alone have crumbled some of the toughest fighters in the world, and his willingness to trade shots in the pocket has given us some of the most memorable wars in UFC history. Then you have Paddy Pimblett, the Liverpool native who came into the UFC with massive hype and an even bigger personality. Paddy represents this new generation of fighters who understand that the fight game is about more than what happens in the cage. He knows how to sell a fight, he knows how to get people talking, and he's built a loyal fan base that rides with him through every victory and every setback. When this fight was first rumored and then eventually confirmed, the MMA world split into two camps. You had people who thought Paddy was taking on too much too soon, stepping into deep waters with a legitimate killer before he was ready. Then you had Paddy's supporters who believed the young fighter's confidence was warranted and that his grappling skills could neutralize Gaethje's striking advantage. The trash talk leading up to the fight was exactly what you'd expect. Paddy came out swinging verbally, talking about how he was going to expose Gaethje, how the veteran was past his prime, how the new generation was taking over. He posted on social media constantly, keeping his name in the headlines and building anticipation for what would be his biggest test to date. Gaethje handled it the way he always does, with quiet confidence and an understanding of what violence he was about to bring. In interviews, he kept things simple, talking about how excited he was to welcome Paddy to the highest level of competition. There was something almost ominous about how calm Gaethje remained throughout all the promotion, like a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. The betting odds told an interesting story too. While Gaethje was favored, Paddy's odds weren't as bad as some expected, showing that there was genuine belief among many people that the young fighter could pull off an upset. The discussions on forums, social media, and MMA podcasts were absolutely endless. Everyone had an opinion on how this fight would go down. Some analysts pointed to Paddy's submission skills as his path to victory, suggesting that if he could survive the early onslaught and get Gaethje into deep waters or get the fight to the ground, he'd have a real chance. Others looked at Gaethje's experience against high-level grapplers and felt confident that he had the takedown defense and fight IQ to keep it standing, where he held every advantage. When fight night finally arrived, the energy inside the arena was absolutely electric. You could feel the tension in the air as both fighters made their walks to the octagon. Gaethje looked like he always does, focused and ready to go to war. Paddy came out with his usual energy, trying to project confidence, even though anyone watching closely could see the weight of the moment on his shoulders. The referee gave the final instructions, the fighters touched gloves, and then the chaos began. From the very first exchange, it was clear this fight was going to be everything the violence-hungry MMA fans hoped for.
Gaethje immediately started working his leg kicks, those devastating shots that have become his trademark weapon over the years. Paddy tried to close the distance, looking to get inside where Gaethje's power would be less effective and where he might find opportunities to clinch or shoot for takedowns. But Gaethje's ringcraft and experience showed immediately. He controlled the center of the octagon, cutting off angles, and every time Paddy tried to rush in, he was met with sharp counters and more brutal leg kicks. The sound of those leg kicks echoing through the arena was sickening. Each one landed with a thud that made the crowd wince, and you could see Paddy's movement already being compromised. His stance started to change, his mobility decreased, and the confidence he showed in the opening seconds began to fade as the reality of Gaethje's power set in. Midway through the first round, Gaethje landed a combination that visibly hurt Paddy. A left hook to the body, followed by a right hand upstairs that snapped Paddy's head back. The Liverpool fighter showed his toughness by staying on his feet, but Gaethje smelled blood in the water and immediately increased his pressure. What happened next was a masterclass in finishing a hurt opponent. Gaethje didn't rush in wildly like some fighters do when they sense a finish. Instead, he stayed composed, picking his shots carefully, mixing up his attacks to head and body, never giving Paddy a moment to recover or find his rhythm again. Paddy tried to shoot for a desperation takedown, but Gaethje's takedown defense held firm. He sprawled perfectly, maintaining his base, and immediately started landing shots to Paddy's head as the young fighter held on to his legs. When they separated, you could see the damage that had been done. Paddy's face was already marked up, his movement was compromised, and his corner was shouting instructions that seemed to fall on deaf ears. The final sequence of the fight was brutal to watch. Gaethje trapped Paddy against the fence and unleashed a combination that dropped him to the canvas. The referee stepped in immediately, waving off the fight, as Gaethje's corner and team rushed into the octagon to celebrate. Now this is where things get absolutely wild. Joe Rogan's immediate reaction during the broadcast was professional and measured. He called the action as it happened, gave Gaethje credit for a dominant performance, and showed respect to Paddy for taking such a dangerous fight. But it was what came later on his podcast that set the MMA world on fire. On the Joe Rogan Experience, just days after the fight, Rogan sat down with his guests and the conversation inevitably turned to the Gaethje versus Pimblett fight. What came out of Rogan's mouth next shocked everyone listening. He started breaking down the matchmaking decision, questioning why this fight was made in the first place, and suggesting that putting Paddy in with Gaethje at this stage of his career was borderline criminal.
Rogan spoke about the responsibility that promoters and matchmakers have to protect fighters, especially younger fighters who might not fully understand the danger they're walking into. He compared it to throwing a lamb to a lion, saying that anyone with real knowledge of fighting could see this matchup was a mismatch of the highest order. The passion in Rogan's voice was something people rarely hear from him. He talked about the long-term damage that fights such as this can do to a fighter's career and health. He brought up examples from boxing and MMA history, where promising young fighters were pushed too hard, too fast, and never recovered from devastating losses. Then came the line that everyone is talking about. Rogan said that the people who made this fight should face serious consequences, using language that shocked even longtime listeners of his podcast. He suggested that matchmakers who consistently put fighters in dangerous mismatches should be held accountable, possibly facing sanctions or even being removed from their positions. The exact quote that's being shared everywhere is when Rogan said something along the lines of, "Whoever greenlit this fight, knowing the massive skill and experience gap, should face serious professional consequences, because this wasn't matchmaking, this was feeding someone to a known killer." The raw emotion and genuine anger in his voice made it clear this wasn't just hot takes for content. This was real concern from someone who's been around combat sports for decades. Rogan went on to explain that while Paddy has skills and potential, the jump from where he was in his development to facing someone like Justin Gaethje was just too massive. He compared it to taking a promising high school football player and throwing him into an NFL game against all-pro defenders. The physical toll alone could be career-altering, not to mention the psychological impact of such a one-sided beating. The response to Rogan's comments has been absolutely massive. Social media exploded with debates about matchmaking ethics, fighter safety, and the responsibility of promotions to protect their athletes. Some people completely agreed with Rogan, pointing out that the UFC and other organizations have a history of pushing prospects too fast when there's hype behind them. These supporters argue that the business side of MMA often overrides common sense matchmaking. When a fighter has a big personality and a loyal fan base like Paddy does, there's pressure to keep them in big fights that generate buzz and pay-per-view buys. But this approach can lead to fighters being put in situations where they're severely overmatched, resulting in the kind of beating we saw in the Gaethje fight. On the other side, there are those who defend the matchmaking decision. They point out that Paddy called out top fighters constantly, positioned himself as ready for anyone in the division, and essentially talked himself into this fight. The argument goes that fighters who build their brand on confidence and trash talk need to be able to back it up, and if they can't, that's on them, not the matchmakers. Other fighters started weighing in on the controversy too. Some veterans sided with Rogan, sharing their own stories of being matched too tough too early in their careers and the lasting impact it had. They talked about how the culture in MMA sometimes pushes fighters to accept dangerous fights because turning them down is seen as weakness or fear. Younger fighters and prospects expressed more mixed feelings. Some appreciated Rogan's concern, but worried that his comments might lead to them getting fewer opportunities to fight ranked opponents and prove themselves. They argued that every fighter knows the risks, and if they accept a fight, they should be allowed to compete without outsiders second-guessing the decision. Combat sports analysts have been dissecting the situation from every angle. Some have pulled up statistics showing the win-loss records and rankings of opponents that Paddy faced before the Gaethje fight, trying to demonstrate that the jump in competition level was indeed too steep. Others have compared this situation to other instances of matchmaking that drew criticism in the past. In the aftermath of the fight and all the controversy surrounding Rogan's comments, people have been watching closely to see how Paddy Pimblett responds. The Liverpool fighter has always been known for his mental toughness and his ability to bounce back from setbacks, but a loss this decisive in public is a different beast entirely. Paddy's initial statement after the fight showed class and maturity. He congratulated Gaethje, acknowledged that he got beaten by the better man on the night, and talked about going back to the drawing board to improve. There was no excuses, no complaints about the matchmaking, just a fighter accepting the reality of what happened and vowing to come back stronger. As the Rogan controversy blew up, Paddy addressed it as well. He pushed back against the idea that he was somehow a victim or that he didn't belong in there with Gaethje. He maintained that he wanted the fight, that he believed he could win, and that getting opportunities to face top competition is how fighters grow and improve. This response actually earned Paddy a lot of respect from people who might have criticized him before. Taking responsibility for a loss rather than hiding behind excuses or outside narratives showed maturity and the kind of mindset that champions have. It also complicated the conversation around Rogan's comments, because if the fighter himself doesn't feel he was done wrong by the matchmaking, does the criticism still hold weight? The path forward for Paddy is now the big question. Does he take easier fights to rebuild his confidence and record, or does he continue to challenge himself against ranked opponents? How the UFC and its team handle his next few fights will say a lot about what lessons were learned from the Gaethje experience. If you made it this far and you're not subscribed yet, what are you even doing? Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we're covering every major story in combat sports as it happens.